Dear friends, I'm Ryan, and for those of you unfamiliar, I started Field System, an ongoing exercise in analyzing and researching past and present movements in building individual autonomy, intercultural dialogue, and nuanced human experiences. It's an opportunity to reflect and to make sense of the complex, intertwined world we live in. I try to come close to some sort of conclusion in order to be helpful to you, the listener and reader, and have something to take away by the end of each post or interview. For this segment of Field System, we're introducing Inquiry, an audio interview series that breaks down old boundaries between the private and the public, and between writing and speech. Inquiry should continue to have the dynamics of oral speech, but the permanency of written word. This is Inquiry 1 with my dear friend Will. I consider him a multi-hyphenate, a creative, intelligent human being with a background in both the worlds of strategy and digital products. I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I hope you guys do too. Lastly, all thoughts and ideas in this conversation are purely our own and do not represent or speak on behalf of specific groups or ideologies. This is Ryan Malin, and this is Field System Inquiry. Please enjoy. So, hi, Will. How are you, man? And could you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey Ryan. My name is Will. Online, everywhere that you can find me, if you can find me. My handle is universe something, UNIVERSUMTHING. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. Do you want to tell them the story of how we met, or should I start first?
No, I'm happy to tell the story. It's just funny because I feel like it doesn't have relevancy to the conversation and the subject matter that we're about to talk about, but it's relevant because that's why we're having this conversation because we had to meet somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, I forget where it was first. It was either on Reddit or it was on, yeah, I think it was on Reddit.
Yeah, Reddit.
That we had our first interaction, but we didn't. It was on the Arcteryx subreddit, and maybe one of us was selling something, which led to some messaging. But then I know we also separately interacted on Grailed because I saw you were selling something. I didn't make the connection that it was you, like the same person that I had messaged on Reddit. And I
Yeah.
saw that the location that you were shipping from was from Taiwan, and I was about to go. I was about to move, and so I was just like, "Hey, can you hold on to this and not have to ship this across the world? And I'll just pick it up from you in person." And then because I have the same handle everywhere, you were like, "Oh wait, it's you." And then we started having conversations about stuff other than buying and selling gear and
Yeah.
clothes, which is definitely something that yeah is something that interests both of us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I
that's
I
my
thought
version. That's my version of the how we met story.
I think the version of like my version of how we met was is sort of similar to like your version, except that yeah. So we met on Reddit on the Valence subreddit. And I think I was
Okay.
like posting like a fit pic or something like that. And then it was like I think it that caught your attention because you noticed it to be somewhat familiar, and you asked me if
Yeah.
like I was in like Taipei or something like that, and then we just connected for like underneath the comments area, and after that I think we didn't speak for I think a long while, and then it was on Grailed until I told you, wait, are you that guy from from the Valence subreddit?
Yeah.
And then after that, we followed each other on Instagram. And then we just started like talking about lots of stuff, basically. Because
Yeah.
then I think I was about to start my company. And then that's where eventually I think that was like the sort of the inception of all conversations
Yeah.
we were gonna have we were about to have, like, but we didn't like focus solely on how to run a business or stuff like that. It eventually
Yeah.
got like really deep too. Like we started talking a lot about like of our vulnerabilities, like trauma, healing,
Yeah.
stuff like that, which I thought was like really, it was like a connection that I valued because it's not like every day you meet someone online where you could like dive into like these deep and meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
And
I
then
mean, I thought the funniest part was that I mean it's 2022.
yeah,
Um, I think we're both in our late 20s, early 30s, and up until this point, I'd never like made a friend online. I mean, that I actually like stayed in touch with and met up with that like was a homie. You know what I mean? I feel like I
yeah,
would like get into, the comment section with people now and then, but like it
yeah,
never turned into anything else. And I won't count like dating apps or whatever. That's that's separate.
yeah,
But yeah, I just remember being like my mind was blown. I was like, wait, it took this long. Like we grew up on the internet, not exclusively, but
yeah.
so that was funny to me as well. On top of the like where we met and like the context of like I don't know being interested in clothes and stuff like that
Yeah,
to like suddenly just diving into being like but what about this philosophical text
yeah,
and it just worked out because I was in New York, you were in Taipei, our sleep schedules are totally different, but the fact that I would like wake up super early in the morning, it would be your evening, you would have just kind of finished working and like have
yeah,
time, like we would just go off and send each other voice notes and long texts
yeah,
and stuff like that. And yeah, somehow it just like where it was able to flow. Yeah.
yeah. I think I've always been pretty appreciative of our friendship and how we met because it's like extremely rare. Like I said, like it's not
Yeah.
every day you would encounter someone online that you could have such like deep conversations with, and like the deep conversations is probably, well, mainly the reason why we're having this conversation today. I'm
Yeah.
like with you, it's not an interview. Like with you, I would say it's a conversation because we always have like extensive conversations on life. Like we've got both gotten each other like out of hard times, difficult times. Like we
Yeah.
basically hold space for each other and are there, which is actually kind of nice. Where like and interesting too. Like everything started out like talking about fashion, but who knew like eventually that grew into something much more. So
Yeah.
like for that, like I'm like really appreciative. So anyways, I know that you've shared with me like during the time that we've known each other that you've studied religion in university. And um what was your main what drove you to study religion in university, and what is your stance on religion now, like compared to when you were 18?
Okay. So I had some exposure to religious studies starting in high school and some humanities classes that were a little bit interdisciplinary. And I just found it a lot more. I just gravitated towards it much more than an art history class alone or a history class alone, because religious studies in itself is very interdisciplinary and just connected to so many other things. And when I got to university, my major was East Asian Studies, but my minor was world religions. And I picked it because I think religion is a more interesting lens to look at culture, look at history, look at art, look at language, and look at spirituality, look at practices and rituals and how people live their lives. I thought that art history was typically a wealthy patron and a talented artist. I thought that history on its own was usually written after the fact to glorify people that were already in power. And I was just much more interested in something that I felt like had applicability to my everyday and how I thought about things. And I think the same could be said for philosophy.
Yeah,
And a lot of the religious studies that I did were focused on Eastern religions. So that's including Buddhism and Taoism, and if you want to call Shinto a religion, which some would call it a philosophy. All of these things, the boundaries are blurry, but um, these and any other religion too. These are a part of people's lives. Whereas I don't think the same could be said for a painting. That's not part of someone's everyday unless it's on their wall. where they go to the museum and look at it every day, but religion is a part of the everyday, and it's around us whether or not we choose to actively engage with it. You're walking down the street, you see a place of worship, you see people on the street preaching, handing out pamphlets, and yeah, it's just something that's constantly around. And I just thought it was more interesting and kind of raising more questions about how I live. And I think compared to when I was 18, that was my first year of university. So that was when I was really kind of first getting exposed to uh, more demanding kind of coursework and reading scholarship about religious studies, not just read this excerpt from this primary source from, the scripture, but also scholarship on it. And I think at the time I was, I don't think my view on religion has necessarily changed in terms of how I practice it or don't practice it myself. I grew up in a household that I didn't have any religious beliefs forced on me. I had parents that had different religious upbringings, but by the time they were adults, they had both kind of abandoned both of those things and just decided that was something that, you know, their parents kind of forced upon them, but they decided they didn't want to force that upon me. And I'm grateful for that. Like they gave me the space to learn and explore and decide what I believed without them really interfering.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've been an atheist, and I still am. And so I mean that's my personal, kind of belief system. I don't subscribe to any particular religion, but I that being said, I do find it interesting. I do find it sometimes inspiring. I do find it thought provoking to read religious texts and to learn more from other people and not just from books about religion, about spirituality, about different philosophies.
Yeah.
So, atheist, I do not believe in God, but I everybody's experience is totally subjective. So I feel like it's not my place to deny someone who does believe in it. I think I would say that respectfully, I envy people that do believe in God, that do have some sort of higher power to put some faith in, and at times rely on that to kind of get them through stuff. I, yeah, I mean, I think there's something very powerful about, yeah, this kind of concept of blind faith. But I don't, and not at the moment, and that's all subject to change.
Yeah.
But that's how it's always been for me. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned how like religion ties into each and every individual. And do you think religion is something that is, well, sort of designed by human beings? Do you think it is designed for us to have some sort of central belief system?
I think it's throughout all of time, people are trying to make sense of the world
Yeah.
and make sense of their experience and what's going on. And so, you know, hundreds, thousands of years ago, when science hadn't advanced enough or we didn't have the tools that we have and the technology that we had to people still wanted explanations. How does the sun come up and the moon go up, and how is all this happening? Why are we having a thunderstorm? You know, all
Yeah.
of these, just kind of very basic things of existing on this earth. And then also how we relate to other people, what happens after someone dies. And so I do think it is, in my opinion, I do think it is a very understandable human desire to have answers and to find
Yeah.
answers and to explain what's going on and to make sense of the world. I don't think not every religion has uh, some sense of everything is random. I
Yeah.
think that's part of certain philosophies, but not all of them.
Mhm.
So I think most of the time, even if the message is that things are random, there's still some sort of, and this is how you deal with it, and this is why it's random,
Mhm.
or it appears random, but actually it's not. Actually, it's based on something in a past life. Actually, it's based on so many different factors that you cannot see, that you do not have control over. But
Yeah.
ultimately, there is something that is, responsible for everything that's going on.
Yeah. Do you believe in karma, or as in Nietzsche's terms, eternal recurrence?
I don't, but I believe in treating people well for the sake of treating people well, and doing
Yeah.
good things for the sake of doing them. And I think um, it's not it's not in any text, but I remember seeing a quotation written that was like, plant the seeds for trees that you will never see grow. Um, and it's, to me, that's somewhat connected. It's maybe someone else thinks it's okay if I'm going to do this, and in the next life I'll be rewarded for the actions that I'm doing right now. But I think, to me, it just simply says that we all exist here for a finite period of time, and whether you believe that we will come back, or that we existed before, or that there's a cycle to it, um, that doesn't, to me, that's not unimportant. What's important is what I'm in control of right now,
Yeah.
irrespective of what the consequences are, which is also part of karma. You don't get a karmic reward if you're doing something, quote unquote, that is good, if you're doing it for the sake of a reward.
Yeah.
If you are extrinsically motivated, then it in you know then it doesn't count.
Yeah.
So whether or not I believe there's a reward, I don't. I think the reward is feeling good and treating other people well, and hopefully in return also being treated well. Like, that's enough of a incentive as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I like how you put that. I I feel like human beings, like our time on Earth, human beings are in search of the feeling of being connectedness. So connectedness, being connected in a way where it has value, where you know you find a meaning in existence, and it's completely independent of his or her own egocentric concerns and preferences. And I think that's where sort of where religion comes in. And this is like a complete tangent, but um what what you just shared with me right now, I feel like also ties in with some sort of existential philosophy. You know what I mean? Especially with Camus. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Camus' work. He talks a lot about, um, the absurdity of, our existence on Earth, where he uses the Greek myth Sisyphus as a primary example. Um, so basically, as a punishment from the gods, he pushes up a boulder every morning, and when he gets to the top of the hill, the boulder comes coming down again, and then he repeats this pattern every single day. But then I think through this story, Sisyphus, through this like recurring theme, well, Sisyphus only has like one sort of choice he's able to make, is to, stick his finger to the gods and say, I'm done with this whole process. But then he continues
Yeah.
on to do this every single day, which which I thought what you said was really important because I think it's also about being accountable and responsible for each and every action we take across time and with everyone we encounter, and not sort of, well, sort of blame it on, religion or, some sort of divineness. You know what I mean? So that's my stance, and your stance on, on religion are somewhat similar. I haven't found sort of my path on like what I lean more towards. Like, am I an atheist, or do I believe in some sort of divine energy or some divine being that has some sort of higher power than most of us do? But like for me, I think none of that is irrelevant. Like none
Yeah,
of
I mean,
none,
oh,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry. Oh, you go ahead. My bad.
Like I said, like my personal stance is my personal stance.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's if someone else feels like there is, then that is their reality. And that has power. I think that's also why studying it has been interesting, not just to be taking it from this distance academic approach, being like, well, this doesn't affect me. Well, it does because you interact with other people. So, to understand how they think, how they're operating based on what principles, um, based on what they were taught and what they believe, that's incredibly relevant. And life is dynamic and we have choices all the time. So
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's a here's my final decision. I'm not gonna, there's nothing that could influence me to rethink it. I think quite the opposite. Like I think I try to always be open to learning more, hearing more, thinking about things more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing that I can do is just be open-minded.
Yeah. So there's this one thing that I've been sort of tried to get a grasp on, is um spirituality and religion. So there's been a sort of uprising in recent years on spirituality and the whole mindfulness movement. Well, not a movement exactly, but you know, through like my own past experience, like throughout the past year, like some people say religion is spirituality, but then there are also other people where um will divide it into two separate, things. Spirituality as an individual belief system, whereas religion is a collective belief system. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you have any, thoughts on like spirituality, and does it overlap with religion?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's overlap. Um I think spirituality has multiple interpretations, and I think in the current world that we live in, one of those interpretations, one of those mainstream kind of definitions, collective sort of agreement on what that can mean, not the singular and only, but one of those more predominant thoughts is that it's, as you said, it sort of strips out the idea of organized religion, that there is some authority figure. It's something that's much more personal. But I think what is a little bit unsettling is the fact that it also tends to strip out the origins to make it, you know, quote unquote, more palatable, or easier to understand. Meaning, meditation and mindfulness is certainly a practice that stems from India and then Hinduism and uh, that branching out, and Buddhism developing as a development out of Hinduism and spreading across Asia. So to essentially erase that history behind it might make it more approachable for someone in the West who simply just wants to figure out how they can spend their 5 minute break at their office job to refocus and ground themselves. And yeah, I struggle to, kind of see how I land on that in terms of is there is that just appropriation? Is that appropriation without understanding? Um, and I mean, I think the answer is yes, but whose responsibility is it to do that educating? Um, so I think I take issue more with the kind of stripping away at where it's coming from and people taking credit for it or rebranding it and not, yeah, just not acknowledging the source. And that's not to say that, in, hundreds of years ago in Europe or in, basically in
Yeah.
white history that there was not um, a spiritual or religious practice of, um, you know, taking quiet time, being reflective. That's not exclusive to, any particular region or, yeah, but I do think that what's been co-opted is related to mindfulness practices from Buddhism mainly. So I think the more detached these practices become from their origin, it's missing something for me. And it seems like it's just been, not to get preachy here about what, but it's unfortunate to me that it's just become a big part of capitalism. It's how can we
Yeah.
rebrand this so that we can profit off of it? And you know, I, I don't need to name check any mindfulness apps or websites or retreat centers. Um, I think everyone is aware of what those are, but you don't hear about them giving back to the communities that originated this at all. It's just purely, oh, this is great. This is a tool. This is beneficial to people, and we can profit off of it. Um, so not to get into an anti-capitalist uh, tirade or anything like that, because that is the world that we live in. That those are the boundaries. It sounds nice to go live on a commune and be self-sufficient, but that's not my reality, and that might be idealistic. So I think it's better to have eyes wide open as to what is going on from
Yeah.
my perspective. Yeah.
I think it's interesting you said like have like the words you use were have your eye opened, have your eyes opened. And that also equates back to, mindfulness practices on like being aware. Like
Yeah.
this having this awareness towards like what people are preaching or certain concepts people are,
I
communicating.
mean, it's almost comical to me that one of the sort of central messages or teachings in this practice is to be aware, and yet the people who are doing the teaching are not are not actually
Are not,
making the people
yeah,
aware of where it comes from.
yeah,
And not everyone wants a history lesson before they sit down for their, how to de-stress or how to,
yeah,
ease your mind before you go to bed. But yeah, I think there's some contradiction there that, I can laugh at, but also it's, I laugh at it initially, but to me, it's problematic
yeah.
in a way. Yeah.
Like for me, I feel like religion, well, multiple religions has some sort of, like you said, contradictions. Like some elements of it are contradictory, and there are loopholes to it. And I feel like none of it is consistent. You find something, you try to like cover up like um you try to cover up this and then water comes out of another place. You're trying to fix a leak, basically.
Yeah. but I think that's, that's evolution over time. None of the way that people are currently practicing religion is how people were practicing it when the religion was
Yeah,
conceived. And that's why there are different sects and branches splitting off, and, people deciding, no, that interpretation of this text is heresy, and this interpretation is correct, and our version is the only version that is correct. I think there will always be kind of continuous reinterpretation to some extent. What the speed
yeah,
of that is changes over time. Um, but I agree. There's definitely very much, you know, changing changing things to suit whatever the
yeah,
present situation is. And so many texts, and I'm speaking from my experience and from what I studied. And as I said, that's more focused on Eastern religions. I can't really come up with any examples in, Christianity or the Abrahamic, faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But,
yeah,
I think, yeah, people are writing texts, claiming texts are, coming written by certain individuals. And, now after all this time, we can prove that's just not true. This was just a brand new text written by someone hundreds or a thousand years later after the historical Buddha,
yeah,
after someone, lived. So yeah, there
it-
there definitely is contradiction.
yeah. I mean, like for me, I feel like a lot of, I mean, spirituality and capitalism or religion and capitalism is sort of interesting, and to an extent where I feel like it's somewhat absurd because mm, I feel like a lot has been trimmed down. For instance, if we look at the health and wellness movement, and people are starting to practice yoga on a daily basis, and I feel like people are sort of, there's a misconception on like what yoga is, for instance. You know what I mean? That's just like one partial aspect of the greater picture.
I mean, I think, as history progresses, as time goes on, circumstances change, people look for new explanations,
Mhm.
people look to reinterpret text, people look to rewrite the book, so to speak, and then they have to explain why they change things. And I don't like
It,
that answer at all. Never mind. Cut that out.
it's like what you said earlier, like religion is dynamic. The
Yeah,
context of it can be shifted towards like certain individual groups like across time.
yeah,
Like it's somewhat territorial, like across, a timeline, like when it
yeah.
comes to
I mean,
religion.
I think religion, well, I think things seem like they're contradictory because we're looking at, well, this is what it was, in the year 800, and this is what it looked like now. But
Hmm.
like you just, like we're talking about, like things are dynamic. So what happened between those in that time period? Things had to evolve. There had to be new explanations. There were competing philosophies, other competing schools that were interpreting texts differently. So it makes sense that there will be contradiction, just like there is contradiction in things that we used to, as humans believe, where this is fact, this is how this thing works. And then later
Yeah,
science is like, no, that's not true. But then still
yeah,
people think the earth is flat. You know what I mean? That's
yeah.
contradictory to what evidence we have, but people still choose to believe what they choose to believe. Um,
There is one thing that I want to add. There's one thing
yeah.
that I dislike about religion is I think some every now and then, whether, I don't want to like pinpoint which religion and like specifically, but there are religion where they sort of have they go extremes to communicate the idea of truism. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're a Taoist, you have to believe in Guanyin, and only like being a Taoist is the way to, go to heaven or something like that. And that's something that I've grown to dislike.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were talking about religion versus spirituality, I it's a very personal thing. I mean, it's not if you just go to the place of worship and you just listen to the person who's, you know, the authority figure and telling you this is what to believe, but the moment that you're, not there with the congregation or the community, it becomes something that's a lot more personal. You might be thinking, oh, how did that talk that was given today, like how do I relate to that? Or but I think it is something very personal at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm not really a fan of anything that's, about absolutes and about extremes and about
Yeah.
prescribing. You either subscribe to this and accept this, or you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Like for me, religion should be some sort of, experiential reality. It's participatory, where it's not like I'm communicating an idea and you have to believe this. Like
yeah,
for like the way I was brought up and the way, um, so basically my surroundings, like people are usually preaching something to me, and it hasn't been experienced for me.
yeah,
Like without experience, you're unable to understand religion at its truest essence. And if someone's like, because you have an incense at this temple and you pray to God, I feel like that for me, I'm opposed to that. I'm sort of against that idea, because that for me is sort of escapism from reality and not being accountable for you know the actions you make. Some sort of
yeah.
escapism from reality in a way.
I mean, I think it goes back a little bit to when we were talking about karma and sort of having an intrinsic motivation to do something versus, thinking you're going to be rewarded for it. And also just sort of doing something for the sake of going through the motions because that's what you were told to do, or that's how it's always been done, or this is just the procedure that we do without having a personal understanding and connection to
Yeah.
what does that mean for me? How do I feel when I'm doing it? What is the intention that I'm setting before? And how does this, yeah, what does this mean to me? And how does this um, make me feel connected or have a greater sense of understanding? All of those big questions that we talked about in the beginning, like what, like, did humans create religion and what is it? And I think it's just out of a search for answers, and search for purpose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never been a fan of like you need to show up, and showing up to the service or to the temple um is kind of enough. I mean, it is enough if that's what you want to do, um but personally I would find it a bit empty
Mm.
if I was just purely doing it just to kind of because these are the steps. Um,
Yeah.
but again, I'm not religious, so I'm not performing any of these things. It's just more of a thought experiment for me. Yeah.
Yeah. To round that up, I feel like just for me, spirituality is more on the individual, and religion is more on the organized community-based system of beliefs.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I do feel like if one day if one day religion, when it loses its power, people that are lost, the collective will find other institutions in replacement for religion.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think regardless of, whatever polling that they continue to do every year to say, oh, this, you know, in this specific country, the number of people who identify as being religious or subscribing to a specific religion is on the decline overall. I I don't think it'll ever be erased. I do think that I mean, I would hope that it's not, I don't think that it's something that I want to be replaced. Again, like I think it serves a purpose for a lot of people and it's important to a lot of people. But I would think that like in addition, it
Hmm.
would be cool if there were other, communities that were not tied into you must believe this or you have to subscribe to this ideology, um, but just like supportive communities. And of course they exist, but not on the scale, not they don't have they don't get tax breaks, they don't, they don't have buildings
Yeah.
in places globally. So it's not quite the same. They might
Yeah.
be more loosely organized and meet at the park instead of having their, church that they don't pay taxes on or something like that. But yeah,
A meet in the park. A meet in the park kind of sounds cultish.
I mean, but that term in itself is loaded, right? I mean, in religious studies scholarship, they don't use that word anymore. They feel like it's the term is new religious movement because it
Yeah.
has so many of the same characteristics of an old religion. So,
Hmm.
you know, I'm not saying like I don't throw around that word. I'm just saying it's interesting that, at least in scholarship, that it went from, just calling it a cult and sort of dismissing it as something separate as to like recognizing that it has the same uh hold over people. People do believe things that were created in the last, 100 years or less
Hmm.
just as devoutly as things that came, originated thousands of years ago. Um, so again, it's like in terms of someone choosing to subscribe or participate in something, that's up to them. Where I draw the line is for a new religious movement or something, an institution that's been around for thousands of years is the same, which is like,
Yeah.
do no harm. So I think when people think of cults, they think of organizations that, uh, commit, you know, group suicide together or,
Yeah.
that are essentially following, a leader and subjecting themselves to being exploited to
Yeah.
some extent.
Yeah.
And people would make arguments about organized religion that there are certain, uh, groups that are established and considered to be, mainstream and they're not a new religious movement. But then you hear about the people that are organizing them that are living in, have private jets and lavish lifestyles, and that
Yeah.
that is, in my opinion, exploiting people in a different way, especially people that are already struggling financially,
Hmm.
and think that making financial contributions is going to somehow,
Save
aid them in
you.
whatever spiritual debt that they may have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I also think is bullshit, to be honest. I think that's like that ties back to what you were saying like really early on, like religion and spirituality giving into capitalism, where it's not its truest form or essence.
Yeah, I wouldn't be absolutist about it because I do think, you know, I think it just depends on how funds are allocated and how the messaging is. If it's like you have to pay to be able to attend, I don't I don't really think that's a great thing. If it's like, hey, if you're in a financial position to contribute and we're going to use this money to give back to the community, to support members of our community that are, that could
Mm,
use support, whether it's with housing or food or access to healthcare or, any sort of number of those things. Like I'm not against, fundraising from the group for the
yeah,
group, but it's quite different when it's just for someone's personal gain.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think,
Technical difficulties.
yeah, I'll edit that out. But what type of person do you think leans towards religion, or do you think this is like a too general question in this day and age?
I think it's kind of a loaded question because I feel like there are, I think the the gut reaction is there are people that believe in science, and then there are another group of people that believe in religion. But that's just not true. I mean, there are those people that are clearly split into two groups, but there are also people that believe in both. There are people that go to their place of worship, or they're doing their prayer, or performing whatever rituals, every day, every week, celebrating the holidays when they come around, throughout the year. And they also believe in science. So I don't think that they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, there's not a definite answer to that. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is one thing that I wanted to point out. Do you think, you being currently an atheist, do you think
Mhm.
sort of a divine entity, aka God, do you think God exists? The reason why I asked this is because Nietzsche once said that God is dead and we have killed him. So do you think a God or a divinely figure exists?
Again, I think I sort of maybe touched on this earlier, which is I I don't have the personal, individual, subjective experience
Mm-hmm.
where I believe there to be the existence of
Yeah,
such a divine entity or a God, but I have to accept that other people do, and I coexist with these people in the world.
yeah,
So I have to maybe not, I don't make my personal decisions about how is, this divine entity going to judge me because I don't believe it exists, but I have to understand that other people are living their lives and are making decisions based on the belief that there is, the belief that they have. So
yeah,
I think it comes down to being informed and aware and respectful of what others believe in, because just because I don't believe doesn't mean that I'm then judging everyone else based on what they are doing or not doing based on a different belief that they have.
yeah. I understand. Well, I feel like a lot of people when they're communicating God, I was raised Christian, and then for a short period of time, I was, an atheist, and then I was briefly a Taoist, and now I'm not too sure. It's a
Yeah.
mind fuck there, but like I said, it should be more of an experiential reality opposed to being a rigid belief. Because for me, I for me right now, I think that God, you know, does not exist. The reason why this doesn't have anything to do with Nietzsche's belief, but I feel like God is either omniscient, all good, or all knowing, but he can't be like all three at the same time. Because if he is all knowing and all good, then there wouldn't have been so many traumatic events throughout the course of history, or in our personal histories, whether like you know it could be a lot of things, you know personal traumatic events. This person would have been cheated on, or just because I believed in God, if he was all knowing and if he was all good, then that wouldn't have happened, right?
And all powerful, right? That's the third one.
Yeah.
Um,
But he can have two, but he can't have, like, he's not like all of them. He's not like, he can't be that good, you know what I mean? If there is a God, I think it's some in some ways it's sort of inadequate because how it's been used, the word God or divine. You know what I mean?
yeah, again, it's like it's not something that I personally subscribe to, the
Yeah.
existence. It's just, but it's out there,
It's
you
just
know.
out there, yeah.
So I have to
I mean, if some
have to
people
take
can,
that into
yeah,
consideration.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if some people find balance or faith in God, then good for them. I just hope that these people someday can be accountable or hold themselves accountable for the decisions and choices they make. instead of using God or the divine as an excuse, to escape or bypass reality. Because in the end, no matter what religion or what dimension you're from, I think at the end of the day, we're all human beings on here on Earth experiencing planet Earth. So, which brings me to my next question, actually. Like, what do you think is the meaning in life?
That's a broad question. I will try to answer it, but I guess I'll first backtrack a little bit into what you just said about, you know, we are here on this earth and this,
Mm-hmm.
reality, and not necessarily using religion as a tool as escapism from that. And um, it's more complex than what I'm about to sort of try to encapsulate from my limited understanding. But there has been a movement with competing schools and disagreements, but
I do want to.
something that
Oh,
you,
sorry.
go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing just to give Grant a little bit more clarity.
Sure.
So the reason why I asked you this question, the meaning in life, is because a lot of people find meaning in life through religion or spirituality. So if we strip away the elements of spirituality and religion, then what is the meaning in life? I I'm try I'm sort of trying to narrow the question down
Sure.
where it's not like as broad as it was before. But sorry, you go ahead.
No, let me answer the question then, which is either very simple or seems like a non-answer, which is like it's up to each person to decide like what life means to them, what motivates them, what
Yeah.
drives them. And that can either be rooted in faith, that can be rooted in fear, that can be rooted in selfishness, that can be rooted in um, multiple things or just
Mhm.
one of them. But I think the oftentimes there's some sort of uh, preachiness from certain religious authorities saying that, well, how could you, if you don't believe in God, then what's stopping you from just being a terrible person, basically? Um, and it's like, but as far as I'm concerned, the existence of God or believing in any sort of higher power that I don't have a personal experiential encounter with, doesn't, that's not influencing my decision of how to treat myself or other people or like live in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like a
But I
lot
did
of
want to,
sorry, you go ahead first. I cut you off there.
what I started to talk about or whatever was, that rather than sort of casting painting with broad strokes and saying that organized religion is a means to for escapism or bypassing reality. there and this is just like one example. I'd be curious to know what other examples there are. But I'll just sort of draw on one that I'm a little bit more
Mhm.
aware of, which is in Taiwan. There has been a movement that has sort of been coined as humanistic Buddhism, which is rather than having temples with monks on the top of mountains doing their meditation and keeping the grounds clean and waking up early and going out and begging for food or any of, like, basically, rather than have these monastic practices, which may very well be beneficial to those individuals in gaining more awareness, greater understanding into
Mhm.
the universe or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
um, there's been a movement that sort of says like that's great, but what about everybody else? Like, what are these institutions? What are these temples? What are these individuals that are there living a monastic life, contributing to everybody else. And so there's a few different organizations that have been more focused on engagement with society. And I think, yeah, just a more grounded in reality instead of reciting texts and counting prayer beads and, raking
Yeah.
the leaves, in the garden. And I'm not speaking about those things as in any sort of condescending or negative sense, but like in addition to that, if the purpose, if the stated goal of certain schools of Buddhism is to become a bodhisattva, to forsake our own enlightenment until we have helped every other living being reach that, then let's be let's be very clear. What are the people that are living on the top of the mountain doing to, in this life, in this world,
Hmm.
actually achieve that goal in helping others? And I'm sure they have their own opinion about that and would say, well, the work that we are doing may not be visible, but it is for the sake of all living beings. But I think, there have in more recent times been schools that are like, all right, that's great, but let's also do charity work.
Hmm.
So I don't know. It's a tangent, but you can edit that out if you feel like it.
No, not at all. I'm gonna keep this for sure. But I do want to ask you though,
Yeah.
the individuals who have, I mean, are on their own spiritual journey up in the mountains raking leaves. Do you think that has some sort of contribution to the the collective, or not at all? Or do you think it's bullshit?
I don't think it has any impact on my life, but there might be people that, you know, contribute and donate food and visit the temple and get guidance from
Hmm.
the folks that are living there, not as a layperson, but as a nun or a monk studying. So if whatever that layperson is benefiting from is, if that's the result of the actions and the work and the meditation and the raking and the carrying water up from the river, then I don't think it's pointless. I just
Hmm.
think that the humanistic Buddhism sort of, and that there's multiple schools with that. I think they're saying, let's try to do things on a larger scale. Let's try to like have impact on a larger scale that benefits more people in a more tangible way. So
Yeah.
it's not really, it's not, I cannot be objective about it and say what they're doing is worthless. What they're doing, yeah, I think it's relative. I think
Hmm.
the scale of their impact in reality, as I see it, is smaller if
Hmm.
they're in a remote, isolated place, having very little contact with the outside rest of the world. Um, I would be curious to know what they have to say about that. But
For sure.
you know, yeah,
I just think that either way, the importance of being rooted in reality is extremely important. That's just like, that's all I have to say about that. Like I think having religion, I think it's important because some people, they could get easily lost in life or get swayed away by, certain, teachings, and having a grounding force to sort of pull them back when they're lost is, I think it's a nice and important thing to have. But I think this is great, man. I think we could cap it off here.
sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate the conversation and you agreeing to do this with me.
Yeah, it's you're taking my podcast virginity, which is
This is also my podcast. Oh wait, this is my second. No wait, this is okay. Sorry. Oh,
It's all right.
the confidence there, but you go ahead.
Yeah, no, I guess I'll just, it's been fun. I feel like I've rambled. I didn't prepare much. I mean, I knew sort of the overall topics and some of the questions that you might hit on.
Yeah,
So I wish I wish I could have collected my thoughts better, but hopefully you feel like you got some answers that are
I have, man.
maybe not, final answers, but at least
I hope
cause for
yeah.
raising more questions and thought provoking, not in some profound way necessarily, but
Yeah,
just
I think the purpose of all of this is hopefully to create an argument. I think a lot of people will probably think we're just two individuals bastardizing on like religion and spirituality, but I would love to do a part two.
no, I think quite the opposite. I mean, I mean, if that's someone's opinion, that's their opinion, but like I would love to hear from another perspective, right? You've heard from a staunch atheist who's taken a relatively like academic and distance approach,
Hmm.
but who lives in this world and has, friends and coworkers that are participating in organized religion. But I think it would be good to hear from them too.
I think being having this channel open and charting pathways for, you know, different beliefs, keeping it, open-minded, like you said. Keeping it open-minded. We're all up for arguments. If anyone wants to fight us. Just kidding. But we have less than a minute left, and I thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Be well.
Cut.
Peace.